We're joined by our Senior Advisor for Foreign Policy and National Security, Rick Grenell. Rick, we just heard a news report for people who watch our broadcast, but I want to say this for people who are listening. The FCC mandated that the cell phone companies start taking down this Huawei technology that's on these cell towers that has enabled the Chinese government to spy on our most strategic assets, including the U.S. Strategic Command, which oversees our nuclear weapons arsenal. And one of the reports on Fox News is that they haven't completed this because they were $3 billion short. I mean, now, Rick, at a time when we spend billions and billions on legislation, we don't even know where it's going half the time. I mean, that happens. If you're $3 billion short to get the Chinese tech off of your cell towers, you would think that would be something that would be more urgent in the United States of America.
Look, this goes back to something, Jordan, that we've talked a lot about, which is the whole Russia narrative. The collusion hoax is really what the Chinese wants American politicians and American governments to do. They have been able to get away with climbing into our systems because the press and the Democrats have literally been saying, don't look at China, look at Russia. The Trump administration tried to do this. When I was ambassador, when I was DNI, we were screaming about what the Chinese were doing. The CNN exclusive, that's not an exclusive. We knew that during the Trump administration. They just didn't pay attention until now.
You know, Rick, one of the aspects of it, I mentioned this earlier in the first segment of the broadcast, but you've got the FBI started a counterintelligence investigation. And I'm not complaining. I think that was a good thing to do. Because it was the situation where the equipment was being put in. In this particular situation, the Chinese government was offering to spend $100 million to build a Chinese garden at the National Arboretum in Washington. Those of us that know Washington know where that is, beautiful area. But they were going to put temples, pavilions, and a 70-foot white pagoda. The project was, very enthusiastically endorsed by the government in Washington, D.C., more tourism. U.S. counterintelligence officials began digging into the details. They found a couple of red flags. Let me point them out. The pagoda, they noted, would have been strategically placed on one of the highest points in Washington, D.C., 2 miles from the U.S. Capitol, with the FBI determined would be a perfect spot for signal intelligence collection. Then, also alarming was, and you'll appreciate this because both being a diplomat and a head of DNI, also alarming was the Chinese officials wanted to build the pagoda with materials to the U.S. that were going to be sent and shipped via U.S. to the United States in diplomatic pouches, which U.S. custom officials then cannot, of course, look at because of our international agreements and our treaty agreements with these parties. That's how they wanted to build it. This shows you the depth of what China will do to try to gather intelligence on the United States.
And let me be clear, this is the tip of the iceberg. If you were on the other side of seeing the intelligence, we have seen this for years. We've explained this to governments in Europe. I personally have explained this to the Germans. We have examples of what the Chinese were trying to do throughout Europe that we shared. Top secret security clearance information for only individuals with a top secret security clearance could get this information. We got approval to give it to some of our allies, and some of our allies didn't believe it, or were too far down the road with the Chinese products that they weren't able to kind of rip it out or pull it back, or they thought this was a real problem. They thought that they could institute some sort of program to stop the Chinese from doing what they wanted to do, and they were going to still take all of the hardware and software. And we said, no, they have a backdoor right into your system. If you try to stop them here, they're going to come in around this way. They created the technology. You're not going to be able to stop them. And so we tried during the Trump administration to some success, but there are certain governments in Europe that didn't listen, that are now in a position of finding out that they were wrong. And we certainly have examples throughout the United States where local governments or governors fell for it, and we had to go in and try to stop them. I think the FBI is behind a little bit here. They should have been doing this years ago, years faster than what they have been doing. And yet we need more aggressive oversight. Politicians who get involved in these issues dig deep and then move quickly to try to stop it before it becomes part of a program that you can't rip out.
Yeah, I mean, right now you can rip out the Huawei from the cell towers, and some of that's been done, but it's not been completed. There are still active Huawei towers and the communication device by our military bases. I just want people to understand that, and these companies are saying, "Hey, you just didn't give it. You told us to go in and do this as a private company." And there's another example we put up on the screen: the Warren Air Force Base and all of the Huawei towers. Look at all of the ICBM capabilities right there. I mean, these are where our major nuclear weapons and security devices are. Rick, is this something we have seen? Is this a pattern, the Chinese buying our land? Is this something new? I mean, finally it's getting people's attention. But is this something you saw as DNI, you saw as ambassador, or even going back further with your time at the UN, that they're coming here and buying land, trying to get around the safeguards that we have in place by buying kind of generic farmland that's not necessarily under U.S. review?
You know, this is why I've always said China is a crisis and Russia is a problem, but the entire political system focusing on just Russia, Russia, Russia is really doing Chinese bidding, because we've seen this slow creep from the Chinese for 20 years. They've little by little, they've gotten into Hollywood, into big tech, into our universities. They are buying up land. We've used these examples of where we personally, the United States government, has failed and allowed China to come in and build some of these cell towers, or we found ways that they creeped in and we didn't know. We've used these examples with the Europeans to say, don't do this because we made the mistake. We've tried to be very clear. I think we've got to be much more aggressive, and our politicians in Washington need to educate themselves and catch up.
Let's go to Tim in California. Tim, you're on the air.
What is the Biden administration going to do to stop Chinese espionage?
Yeah, there's the question of the day. I don't see much right now. The FBI, I will say, on this national garden they were going to build with counterintelligence capabilities, Rick, the FBI stopped that through a counterintelligence move. But the Biden administration doesn't seem to saying that they're not on top of this is an understatement.
Look, they first need to recognize that there's a problem, and they haven't even done that. Remember, they've denied that the Hunter Biden laptop full of all sorts of information about China, Chinese businessmen, China policies, China getting close to the Biden administration, Biden team, Biden family. They've never even acknowledged this yet. And so before you figure out how to solve the problem, you got to know that there is a problem. We don't have a Biden family, a White House focused on China because they don't think that it's a problem yet. I mean, we'll just look at Nancy Pelosi's trying to go to Taiwan. The Chinese are now freaking out, and who knows what's going to happen? Are they going to back down? Is the Speaker of the House going to not go to Taiwan simply because China has wagged their finger and said, don't do it? I certainly hope not.
Yeah, I mean, this is the bigger issue. I think it is freaking people out because we're seeing it time and time again. I think it's something that we're just building on. People are just starting to learn about and take seriously the land purchases, what they're purchasing it for. There is legislation, we're going to talk about it later in the broadcast, on the CHIPS Act that's gotten bipartisan support. It's also, though, tried to be derailed because this was the whole Pelosi's husband buying the $5 million. So there's a lot of people at play here, and I think that's what gets people off China, and it's easier to focus on Russia as the bad guy.
Of course.
Because with China, you got legitimate businesses. They're not necessarily breaking the law because they're doing business back and forth. And then you've got you do have safeguards in place, but you have to use them.
But here's the thing. China has intervened in our universities. They've infiltrated the university system. They have infiltrated congressional offices. I think of Eric Swalwell's office, where they've infiltrated congressional offices. They are trying to infiltrate Washington, D.C. in counterintelligence capabilities. Rick, we only got 40 seconds. This threat is real, and we have to be on top of it.
I want to give people a little piece of good news, though. Your government, your intelligence agencies know this. The problem is with the politicians at the local, state, and federal level. They've got to educate themselves, and you've got to demand that they focus on China.
And
that's exactly what we're doing.
It is not just a federal issue. A lot of times what China's doing is going to local governments, just like they try to do in D.C., which is a bigger scale example, and try to say, yeah, we want to do this for you. in North Dakota, hey, we'll build you a pipeline, but you got to give us this land by the Air Force Base.